A week after my son, Caleb, got married, my daughter-in-law, Samantha, knocked on my door, accompanied by a well-dressed man carrying a leather briefcase. "Mom, this is Trevor, a notary." She flashed that phony smile I knew too well. "We're here to help you with some house paperwork." My heart pounded. I knew exactly what they wanted, but they had no idea what I had quietly prepared over the past few months. Thank God I had stayed silent about my true awareness of the ranch's actual value and the ironclad legal trap I had set. Watching Samantha flip through my documents with greedy eyes, I realized silence had been my shield. But to tell it fully, I have to go back to the day everything began to change. To fully understand the calculation behind my silence, you have to look at the balance sheet of the previous 3 months. It began the evening my son Caleb brought Samantha to my historic Beacon Hill brownstone to announce their engagement. I spent 24 hours preparing. The kitchen smelled of fresh yeast, rosemary, and heavy cream. I handcrafted a rich clam chowder and baked fluffy cornbread from scratch, traditional recipes passed down through generations. My feet were swollen from standing so long, but I didn't care. I thought I was investing in the emotional equity of my family. I wore my prettiest mint green silk blouse, hoping to make an excellent impression on the woman marrying my only child. Then the doorbell rang, and the nature of the transaction shifted instantly. When I opened the door with a wide smile and open arms, Samantha did not return the embrace. She merely brushed my shoulders with the tips of her manicured fingers, as if touching me were an unpleasant chore. She stood there in a sharply tailored designer dress, and the clinical click of her high heels on my floor sounded like tiny hammers mapping out an invasion. During dinner, every conversational asset I put forward returned a 0% yield. I tried to ask about her career as a corporate restructuring consultant, her goals, and her life with Caleb. I received only clipped, one-word answers. Yes, no, maybe. Talking to her was like addressing a frozen wall. Her eyes actively audited my home, calculating the depreciation of my furniture and lingering on my ceramic dishes with visible disdain. Caleb tried to dispel the awkwardness, but Samantha merely poked at her plate with her fork, separating the ingredients as if navigating a toxic asset. When I asked if she enjoyed cooking, she flatly stated she preferred proper restaurants. That word proper was a calculated insult. It meant my food, my home, and my entire existence were completely beneath her standards. In the following weeks, each visit grew heavier. She perched on the edge of my sofa as if afraid she would get dirty, her eyes permanently glued to her phone. One afternoon, while I was making coffee, she casually remarked that I would surely enjoy having more time for myself after they got married. It was an early liquidation notice, a polite way of telling me I was being phased out. What chilled my blood wasn't just her coldness, but Caleb's silent compliance. My son, the boy I had raised with everything I had, sat there and allowed it. He fidgeted with his car keys, unable to meet my eyes. I watched him systematically cave under the peer pressure of her high society expectations. He was being conditioned to view his own mother as an embarrassing, old-fashioned liability. The unconditional love I had given him for 30 years was being reclassified as an emotional debt he was eager to write off. The wedding day arrived like an unavoidable corporate hostile takeover, a $1,500,000 production in Rhode Island designed to showcase Samantha's social capital. Every detail was a calculated move to declare my total obsolescence. I arrived early, but the ledger had already been cooked against me. When I entered the chapel, I discovered my designated seat was in the 5th row, tucked neatly behind Samantha's mid-level corporate associates and neighbors who barely knew my son. The mother of the groom was reclassified as an unauthorized asset, pushed to the margins. From that row, I had to crane my neck just to catch a glimpse of my own son walking down the aisle, while strangers who had never spent a single night comforting Caleb through a childhood fever occupied the premium front row real estate. The emotional devaluation accelerated at the reception. Samantha introduced me to her elite guests, not as Caleb's mother, but as a background domestic appliance. "She cooks wonderfully," she whispered with a frozen smile, compressing my 3 decades of motherhood into a simple kitchen function. When it came time for the toasts, I stood up with a lifetime of maternal blessings written on a small paper. I had barely reached my second sentence when Samantha began clapping aggressively, orchestrating a wave of forced applause that completely swallowed my voice before I could finish. I was forced to sit back down at a back corner table, surrounded by distant, wealthy relatives who looked through me as if my presence were a clerical error. I kept my composure. I didn't scream, and I didn't cause a scene. Most people watching me that night probably thought I was weak, a fragile old woman folding under the pressure of an aggressive daughter-in-law. But they didn't understand the invisible chain of the survivor. They see a cage and wonder why the bird doesn't fly. They don't see the glass walls built around a mother's heart. You don't stay silent because you are weak. You stay silent because you are waiting for the predators to step entirely into the clearing. My silence wasn't submission. It was a calculated boundaries buffer. I was actively auditing their behavior, letting them run up a moral deficit they could never liquidate. The supreme irony was that while Samantha was publicly erasing me, I was privately keeping their entire illusion from filing for bankruptcy. 2 days before the ceremony, the luxury venue threatened an immediate collection freeze due to a massive payment deficit from Samantha's side. Caleb had called me panicking. Without a second thought, I quietly advanced $150,000 from my personal accounts to secure the event. I became the ultimate silent investor in their version of family, footing a massive bill for the privilege of my own liquidation. As the dancing started, Caleb danced with Samantha, her mother, and her sisters, never once looking toward my empty corner. Close to 11 p.m., I walked to the parking lot alone. Behind me, I heard Samantha whispering to her bridesmaids about how glad she was that I lived far away. Their cruel giggles followed me all the way to my car. The wedding gold dust settled quickly, leaving behind a cold, systematic pressure that felt less like family care and more like a hostile corporate restructuring plan. Samantha's strategy shifted into high gear. She initiated a relentless campaign of passive-aggressive text messages and unannounced visits to my Beacon Hill brownstone. Every interaction was filled with calculated concern. She began dropping subtle hints about my age, casually introducing terms like cognitive fatigue and structural liability into normal conversations. She would look around my living room and sigh, cooing that this historic home was becoming too heavy a management burden for a 69-year-old widow. My home, where I had spent decades cultivating a peaceful life, was suddenly being audited as an unsafe asset. Then, Caleb was deployed to echo her script. He arrived on a gray afternoon, fidgeting with his car keys, refusing to meet his mother's eye. He sat on the very sofa where I used to comfort him during childhood nightmares and launched into a presentation that clearly belonged to his wife. He explained that he and Samantha were deeply worried about my future. He suggested that the most logical move was to simplify my portfolio by liquidating the brownstone and transferring the capital into a joint investment account, an account where he and Samantha would hold total decision-making power, supposedly to protect me from financial scams. To complete the relocation framework, Samantha presented glossy brochures for a premium senior care facility miles away from Boston. They wanted to strip me of my real estate, seize my liquidity, and lock me away in a high-end warehouse where I would no longer disrupt their financial trajectory. I didn't panic. I didn't break down or yell at my son for trying to evict the mother who had given him everything. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a wave of maternal regret, but there was only absolute clarity. This wasn't a family disagreement. It was a hostile liquidation strategy, and my compassion was a luxury they had overdrafted for the very last time. I realized my presence in their lives had been reduced to a baseline balance sheet, and it was time to adjust the ledger. Instead of signing their elegant trap, I played the part of a hesitant, overwhelmed old woman to perfection, requesting more time to process the numbers. The moment they left, I initiated my counter operation. I called Vanessa, my unapologetic lifelong confidant who knew the true depth of my unappraised holdings. Vanessa didn't offer empty comfort. She instantly connected me with Marcus Sterling, an elite elder asset protection attorney downtown. Sitting in Marcus's office, surrounded by the heavy scent of old mahogany and binding legal text, I laid out the full reality of my estate. My late husband had secretly left me a sprawling, highly profitable 800-acre organic agricultural property and protected timber reserve in the Berkshires, valued at over $45 million. I had spent months quietly fortifying the legal architecture of the estate, keeping my counter strategy entirely insulated from Caleb and Samantha's knowledge. Marcus smiled with the sharp precision of a seasoned combat strategist. Within 48 hours, He drafted a bulletproof legal defense, wrapping my entire $45 million estate, my liquidity, and my historic brownstone safely inside an ironclad, irrevocable trust. By the time my son and his wife returned to collect their easy prize, the trap was already set, and I was holding all the legal leverage. Marcus Sterling did not just secure my immediate assets. His office initiated a deep dive forensic audit into the background of my daughter-in-law, Samantha. 2 days after our initial consultation, Marcus called me back into his office. The room was perfectly quiet, the afternoon light cutting across piles of certified real estate records. Marcus slipped a heavy manila folder across the polished mahogany desk. His expression was completely clinical, the look of a seasoned corporate strategist who had just unmasked a major liability. "This wasn't a romance, Laura," he said calmly. "It was an extraction plot. According to non-public state zoning files and corporate registration data, Samantha's tracking of my estate began months before she ever engineered her first casual meeting with my son, Caleb. Samantha worked as a corporate asset restructuring consultant, a job that gave her early access to municipal development forecasts. She had discovered that a massive, multi-million-dollar state conservation easement was quietly being attached to my 800-acre timber reserve in the Berkshires. The state was prepared to pay millions to preserve that land, a transaction that would instantly skyrocket the value of the property. Samantha realized that the quiet, retired university professor living in a Beacon Hill brownstone was sitting on an absolute gold mine. Her entire courtship of Caleb, her high society demands, and her calculated entry into my family were nothing more than a structured play to gain legal power of attorney and liquidate my real estate holdings before the state deal became public record. I stared at the time-stamped corporate filings, and the last remnants of emotional attachment vanished, replaced by an ice-cold socio-psychological clarity. I didn't panic, and I didn't weep for the absolute betrayal of my family structure. Instead, I analyzed the predatory machinery of Samantha's mind. This was the ultimate realization of what I called the illusion of power from an empty wallet. Status-driven predators like Samantha suffer from a profound psychological dysfunction, entirely confusing the materialist concept of having wealth with the fundamental human concept of being a person of character. Her entire identity, the designer dresses, the wine-colored silk robes, the authoritative click of her high heels, was a superficial shell rented on the credit of anticipated spoils. She believed that projecting an aura of corporate dominance gave her the right to treat an independent older woman as an obsolete asset to be managed and discarded. But it was an entirely hollow power. When you strip a parasite of their target financial leverage, you discover there is absolute vacancy underneath. They have no internal resilience, no moral architecture, and no authentic self to fall back on when the ledger balances against them. Marcus leaned forward, tapping his gold pen against the forensic timeline. "They are operating on the assumption that you are entirely unaware of your own net worth," he noted. "Samantha has scheduled a signing session at your brownstone for this Saturday at noon, bringing a shady financial advisor named Trevor to finalize the joint trust." I looked out the window at the Boston skyline, my mind perfectly sharp, my strategy fully locked. They thought they were running a clean elder extraction campaign against a defenseless grandma. They had no idea that every single word they had uttered was already logged, that my $45 million estate was entirely insulated, and that they were marching directly into a criminal ambush. The Saturday deadline arrived exactly at noon. Through the peephole of my Beacon Hill brownstone, I watched Samantha execute her predictable arrival. She stood on the doorstep, radiating the polished arrogance of a corporate consultant about to close an easy extraction. Beside her stood Trevor, clutching his leather briefcase like a predatory tool. This time, I didn't leave the entry chain engaged. I unlatched the brass deadbolt slowly, intentionally allowing them to step fully into the center of my living room. They walked into the space with the unearned confidence of thieves who believed their target was blind, completely unaware that the ledger had already been audited against them. Samantha wasted no time on familial pleasantries, treating my home like a temporary staging area for liquidation. She aggressively unrolled the contracts across my mahogany table, her glossy red nails pointing directly at the dotted lines. "Everything is prepared, Mom," she cooed, her voice dripping with that manufactured sweetness I had learned to despise. "You just need to execute the signatures here, here, and Caleb and I will assume total management of the asset portfolio. It completely simplifies your liabilities." Trevor ceremoniously pulled out a gold-plated pen, sliding it toward my hand like a loaded weapon. I looked down at the documents, then back up at the two predators hovering over my table. I didn't break out into tears, and I didn't plead for Caleb's missing integrity. Instead, I reached into my pocket and dropped the digital voice recorder directly onto the signing pages. It landed with a heavy, undeniable thud, a precise record of every gaslighting comment and fraudulent threat they had delivered over the previous weeks. Before Samantha could process the sight of the device, I reached into my folder and spread the certified deeds of my 800-acre Berkshire timber reserve across the table. Marcus Sterling stepped into the room with the unyielding authority of an elite elder protection attorney, followed immediately by state police investigators executing a court-authorized sting operation managed by Senior Deputy District Attorney Gary Vance. Trevor turned a deep shade of ash, his hand trembling as he instinctively tried to hide his official notary logbook, which already contained pre-stamped, fraudulent entries for the property transfer, but the investigator blocked his exit path. "This is a formal intervention into real estate fraud and notary misconduct," Gary Vance announced, his voice carrying the full weight of criminal law. Samantha's predatory facade evaporated into complete panic within seconds. She looked at the camera, then at the district attorney, realizing her structured extraction plot had been entirely compromised. Her rented power stripped, she stood there empty, exposed as a baseline criminal who had walked directly into a legal ambush. This wasn't a family drama anymore. It was an accounting of crimes, and the finisher had just been delivered. 6 months have passed since that life-changing afternoon in my Beacon Hill living room, and the ledger of my life has finally balanced into absolute peace. Today, I sit on the expansive wooden porch of my 800-acre Berkshire estate, watching the morning sun rise over a massive territory defined entirely by freedom. The crisp, clean mountain air carries the scent of fresh rain and the wild orange blossoms. I planted last week a daily symphony, reminding me that personal dignity is a crop worth fighting for. The criminal fallout for the predators was swift, decisive, and total. Trevor's notary license was permanently stripped by the state, completely removing his ability to ever weaponize official legal seals against the vulnerable. Samantha currently faces a multi-count criminal indictment for financial fraud, grand larceny, and corporate exploitation, an indelible public record that has permanently liquidated her high society consulting career and stripped away her rented aura of power. As for my son Caleb, his awakening was incredibly bitter and raw. When the full, documented evidence of Samantha's insider land extraction plot was laid bare in open court, his weak-willed illusions completely shattered. He immediately initiated a swift, unyielding divorce, entirely cutting off the woman who had used him as a ladder to a money dream. He visits me every Sunday now by himself, sitting quietly beneath the great timberline, weeping openly and trying to rebuild the bridge he allowed an outsider to burn. I have promised him nothing. I have come to realize that true reconciliation is a long journey that requires patience, evidence of deep remorse, and structural actions, not just memorized apologies. Meanwhile, my unapologetic lifelong confidant, Vanessa, has moved into one of the pristine guest properties. Together, we have officially transformed this estate into the Vanessa Sanctuary, a fully endowed foundation providing elite asset protection, emergency housing, and top-tier legal guidance for older adults whose biological families view them as disposable investments. Looking back at the isolated fifth row I occupied at that wedding, I have come to grasp a deep philosophical truth about human connection. So many of us spend our entire adult lives trying to buy a subscription to a family structure that has been fundamentally overdrawn for years. We systematically make ourselves smaller, accepting the literal crumbs of transactional affection just to maintain the comfortable illusion of domestic harmony. But taking care of your own mental peace is never selfish, and enforcing unyielding boundaries is never an act of betrayal. If you find yourself in a similar situation today, feeling completely invisible or pushed to the absolute margins of a family that only notices you when they want to exploit your resources, please remember this. Your worth does not require their permission or validation to be luminous. Sometimes, the most profound act of love you can offer is not a loud, emotional argument, but a clean, calculated break from biological parasites who treat your lifelong sacrifices as a cash cow. Forgiveness can clear your mind, but a complete legal boundary separation is the only water that will ever wash you free. If my journey spoke to your hidden strength today, hit that subscribe button, share this video with one woman who needs to find her voice, and leave your truth in the comments below. Let us protect our boundaries together.